Welcome to the Life Unfiltered channel. Today, I'm going to read Carolina's story. My name is Carolina. I'm 32 years old, and on the surface, my life is exactly how I always imagined it would be. I work as a human resources analyst for a large company in Rio de Janeiro, and I've been married to Alex, who's 33, for a year. We spent 8 years building a solid relationship before tying the knot, and now we live in a cozy apartment, dreaming of starting a family someday. My routine is structured, almost predictable. I wake up early, face the city's traffic, dedicate myself to work, and then come home, where Alex is waiting for me with the same affection as always. My life seems picture perfect, but sometimes, when everything is quiet and I'm left alone with my thoughts, I feel like something is missing. It's a hard feeling to describe, like a part of me is asleep, hidden somewhere in the past. It was against this backdrop that my story took an unexpected turn. I had just been hired by this large company, full of challenges and opportunities. I was excited and ready to give it my all until the moment I walked into the meeting room and saw him, Daniel. He was the director of the department, and in that moment, he wasn't just my new boss. He was a piece of my past that I didn't realize I was still carrying. That encounter changed everything, and no matter how hard I tried to keep control, my life was about to go completely off track. Daniel was my first love, the boy in 8th grade who never even knew I existed. 20 years had passed, but that smile was still the same. Of course, he didn't recognize me, and I preferred it that way. Back then, I wrote letters I never sent, imagining a world where he'd look at me the way I looked at him. I spent hours with my friends, dreaming up stories where he finally noticed me. But I never went beyond the fantasy. I never had the courage to speak to him, to cross the line into what I believed was unattainable. And now, there he was, not the boy from school, but the director of the department I'd been hired for. I was supposed to focus on work, but something inside me began to shift. It was as if that 13-year-old girl I had left behind suddenly woke up. It wasn't love, but an intense desire to revisit something long gone. As the days went by, I found myself making small excuses to be near Daniel. I'd walk past him in the halls, sometimes on purpose, knowing his lunch schedule since he worked on the floor above mine. Our conversations were always professional, but something was stirring inside me. I had a stable life, a caring husband, and a dream job, but a part of me yearned for something I couldn't quite name. It was as if Daniel had reignited a spark I didn't know still existed, and without realizing it, I became determined to win him over. One day, during a team meeting, I casually mentioned the name of the school I'd attended. His reaction was immediate. He looked at me and smiled. I went to that school too. What a coincidence. What year were you there? I answered with a shy smile. In 2003, I was in 7th grade while you were in 8th. Ah, that's great. I was just a year ahead of you, he said, smiling. At that moment, I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. That brief exchange somehow brought us closer. He was a very busy director who worked on a different floor, so access to him wasn't easy and typically happened during meetings. I started thinking about how to approach him without it seeming forced or inappropriate. After much reflection, I decided to propose a project for the department, something innovative that could catch his attention both for its concept and my dedication. I discussed the idea with my manager, who loved it, and scheduled a meeting with Daniel to go over the details. During the meeting, I presented the project with a professional demeanor, but I couldn't stop my voice from trembling slightly under Daniel's focused gaze. He listened intently, asked insightful questions, and at the end, praised my initiative with a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that seemed to light up a room, and in that moment, my heart raced. My manager was also pleased with his response, and to my surprise, they decided I would take the lead on the project. More than that, Daniel gave me full permission to reach out to him whenever I needed to align on details. From that day on, I started visiting his office more often. Each visit was a mix of nerves and excitement, a chance to be closer to him. He was always impeccable, dressed in elegant suits with a subtle cologne that seemed to fill the room with an almost hypnotic allure. And when he smiled, that disarming, perfectly calculated smile, I felt my defenses crumble. My admiration for him grew, but along with it, a passion I thought had long been dormant began to stir again. Over time, I decided I wanted to be noticed in a different way. I began paying more attention to what I wore to work, choosing fitted but tasteful outfits that highlighted my femininity without losing professionalism. My perfume choices were soft and subtle, like a secret only those close enough could discover. During project meetings, I found excuses to get closer to him. There was always something in a report to show or a chart to explain that required me to stand by his side, close enough to catch the faint trace of his cologne again. I noticed his eyes on me, occasionally fleeting but deliberate glances that didn't go unnoticed. He was sharp. He knew exactly what was happening but maintained a careful, measured demeanor, like someone who understands the game but isn't ready to play it outright. Every encounter deepened my feelings. The closeness, the exchanged glances, the almost tangible magnetism that surrounded every interaction, all of it created a tension that was impossible to ignore. Daniel, with his poise and quiet confidence, was irresistible but also enigmatic. I didn't know where this was heading, but I felt more drawn in with each passing day. And he, with his calculated smiles and gazes that seemed to see through everything, understood without me saying a word. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and said, "Daniel, I remember you." He raised an eyebrow, curious but with a slight smile on his lips. "You remember me? From where?" My heart was pounding, but I had to keep going. "We went to the same school, as you know. It was a long time ago, of course. You were in 8th grade, and I was in 7th. And well," I let out a nervous laugh, "I was completely in love with you back then." He seemed surprised. He blinked a few times before letting out a soft, almost charming laugh. "In love with me?" he asked, with a tone of genuine disbelief. "Yeah, you were always handsome, popular, and to be honest, a bit of a flirt. I remember you were always kissing different girls at school. It seemed like everyone liked you." I looked down for a moment before continuing. "But you never noticed me." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, clearly amused by the memory. "Wow. That was such a long time ago. I have to admit, I don't remember much from back then, but now that you mention it, I guess I was, well, let's say, a bit distracted." He gave a smile that felt more like it was for himself than for me, as if he was reliving those years. Then he added, "Funny that you'd bring that up because my wife, I actually met her back then. She was in my class, you know? We reconnected years later, and now we have 2 kids." I felt my stomach sink slightly at that revelation. Of course, I knew he was married. The ring on his left hand had never gone unnoticed, but hearing him talk about his wife, someone who was part of the past I had idealized so much, brought a dose of reality I hadn't anticipated. "Wow, what a coincidence," I managed to murmur, trying not to let my discomfort show. "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Life's funny like that, isn't it?" I knew he had picked up on something more in that conversation. Maybe not exactly the feelings I still harbored, but he certainly sensed that my confession wasn't just a casual memory. His gaze was sharp, analyzing every detail, every nuance of my expression, and also my neckline. During that lunch, something became clear to me. Daniel's family was important to him. It was evident in the affectionate tone he used when talking about his wife and kids. But at the same time, there was something else. A small detail that might have gone unnoticed by someone else but not by me. The quick, almost instinctive glance he gave my neckline as I adjusted my napkin. It was brief but enough to make me realize he wasn't immune to me. I left with 2 certainties. First, Daniel was fully aware of the boundaries his life imposed on him. But second, and far more important to me, a relationship between us, even an extramarital one, wasn't off the table. There was a door slightly ajar, and I was willing to push it open. Back at the office, my mind raced with 1,000 ideas. I convinced myself that our reunion wasn't a coincidence. It was fate, a second chance to experience something that seemed to have been left in the past. Maybe he was the man of my life, and for some reason, the universe had decided to bring us together at that moment, even if our lives were complicated. If it meant leaving Alex and him, his wife, so be it. But I had to know if he felt the same. I began to refine my approach. I decided not to force anything, but to move at his pace, like a game where he also had control. I became even more deliberate with my appearance, choosing outfits that conveyed professionalism while subtly highlighting my femininity. Scents that were striking yet delicate, smiles and glances at just the right moments, never overdone. In meetings, I looked for opportunities to create small moments of connection. A light touch when handing him something, a discreet laugh at one of his jokes. Everything had a purpose. I noticed that, over time, he also seemed more at ease around me. It wasn't just a director talking to a subordinate anymore. There was something different in the way he looked at me, in how his eyes seemed to see beyond the obvious. I began to casually reference the past in our conversations to build an emotional bridge between us. A memory from school, a comment about how fast time flies. He always responded with a smile or a remark that suggested he was just as comfortable revisiting those memories. During one of our meetings, while we were discussing a technical aspect of the project, I noticed him pause for a second, longer than usual. His eyes locked on mine. The tension in that moment was palpable, and I knew he felt it too. It was as if we were walking a tightrope, balancing between what was acceptable and what was about to cross the line. I had made up my mind. I believed that if we'd reconnected after all these years, there had to be a bigger reason behind it. And if fate had truly brought us together, I was willing to do whatever it took to live out that romance. I was ready to risk everything because, deep down, I believed Daniel felt the same even if he hadn't admitted it to himself yet. Months went by, and the project I had poured my heart into ended up being selected for a prominent industry award. It was the recognition I had always dreamed of. There was a gala event, and everyone from our department attended to celebrate the results. Walking up to the stage to accept the award was one of the most emotional moments of my professional life. I could feel Daniel's gaze fixed on me the entire time, and even without words, I knew he was proud. After the ceremony, there was a cocktail party in the main hall of the building. The atmosphere was filled with celebration, toasts, and lively conversations. I was engaged in discussions with colleagues when Daniel discreetly pulled me aside. With a barely noticeable smile, he leaned in and whispered, "I'll be waiting for you in the car out front. Meet me in 10 minutes." My heart raced. The fact that he was taking precautions to avoid suspicion only heightened the adrenaline. I waited the agreed upon time, casually chatting with colleagues to deflect any curiosity, and then slipped outside. There he was, parked right in front. I got into the car and shut the door, feeling the heat of the moment build between us. He said, "I'll give you a ride home." On the way, we started talking about the event and the project, but our words seemed less important than the unspoken energy between us. There were smiles and glances that conveyed more than any sentence ever could. At one point, Daniel pulled the car over on a quiet street near a park. He turned off the engine and turned to face me, his eyes filled with intensity. "I think it's time to fix a mistake," he said in a low, husky voice. "The mistake of never noticing you back then." I could barely breathe as he leaned in and kissed me. It felt like everything around us disappeared. In that moment, the entire world was just the two of us, just that kiss. His touch was firm yet gentle, and at the same time, it carried an intensity that completely swept me away. He pulled me closer, and the car suddenly felt too small to contain everything we were feeling. We decided to step out and move to a secluded spot in the park's parking lot. There, under the dim glow of the streetlights and the distant hum of the city, we completely surrendered to each other, making love right then and there. What happened was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Every touch, every kiss, every movement was charged with an energy I had never experienced before. My body responded to his as if by magic. When I finally reached my climax, it felt like a massive wave crashed over me, sweeping away everything old and bringing something new, intense, and overwhelming. It was multiple orgasms. I stayed there, wrapped in his arms, feeling the sweat on my skin and my heart racing. I was in ecstasy, fulfilled, as if everything I had lived up to that point was merely a prelude to this experience. I knew I was venturing into dangerous territory, but at that moment, nothing else mattered. It felt as if fate had finally placed us where we were meant to be. What would come next? I had no idea, and honestly, I didn't want to think about it. All that mattered was that, in that instant, I was living the best experience of my life. Days passed, and I continued to meet Daniel, but our encounters always took place in the car. He was afraid to go to a motel. I was completely in love, and without realizing it, I started becoming colder towards Alex, my husband. After 6 months of secret meetings, Daniel asked to talk to me. He was visibly nervous, something he rarely showed. He began by saying that it wasn't an easy conversation, but that we needed to stop seeing each other. Someone had made an anonymous report through the company's compliance channel, alleging that he was involved with an employee. He didn't know who might have suspected us, but the risk was too high. At that moment, my heart shattered. I nodded in agreement, trying to maintain my composure, but inside, it felt like everything we had shared had turned into a bitter lie. From that day on, our interactions were reduced to brief, formal greetings in the hallways, as if nothing had ever happened. However, seeing him every day, knowing he was moving on with his life without me, slowly destroyed me. What hurt the most was realizing that, to him, it seemed it was never love. It was just sex, fleeting desire. While I had given myself entirely to a consuming emotion, he remained untouched, talking about spreadsheets and reports as if nothing else existed. It crushed me. My productivity began to plummet. Tasks I once tackled with passion now felt like a burden. My manager called me in for a talk, concerned, and asked if something was wrong. I denied it with a forced smile, but I knew I wasn't convincing anyone. My performance reflected my emotional state, yet I couldn't shake off the weight of it all. One day, during a team meeting, Daniel announced, with a radiant smile, that his third child had been born. He said, visibly emotional, that he felt blessed to have such a wonderful family. His words were like a knife to my chest. Seeing him, so proud and happy, while I felt shattered by everything we had been through, broke something inside me for good. When I got home, I broke down. I told Alex that I needed to resign because the work environment was taking a toll on me and that this was why I had been distant at home. He, ever patient, simply said he understood and would hold down the fort until I found something better. The day I handed in my resignation letter, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It was as if I were finally closing a chapter that should never have been opened. To my surprise, it took less than 2 weeks for me to be hired by another company. The project I developed at my previous job had made waves in the market, and that opened doors for me. Now, I keep moving forward. I'm still with Alex, who has stood by me even without fully understanding my sudden coldness. I'm still recovering from my passion for Daniel, a feeling that, although it has lessened, still leaves traces in me. I know that one day it will pass. Until then, I continue to rebuild myself, one day at a time, learning from my mistakes and believing that life will eventually find its way. This was Carolina's story on Life Unfiltered. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Here, we always share real-life stories to help you reflect and learn from others' experiences. Check out the description and watch these 2 videos I recommend for you. See you in the next Life Unfiltered.